devices and deception. You've probably got a good idea what I'm going to talk about. But sometimes it's quite a struggle, actually, sort of preparing the word. Sometimes you just don't get you don't get stimulated or something sort of from the Lord to sort of bring. And you can get, well, I can get a bit anxious about it. So I had to go back and listen to my YouTube, thing about do not be anxious. And get myself in the right place. But I think the subject is probably one of those things that the enemy doesn't really want me to talk about, so it sort of puts things in the way, I suppose. Quite a bit of what I came across, it was sort of in research, and this is the wonderful thing about the internet. You've got this amazing amount of information out there. A lot of it is obviously a bit dubious, but you do come across things which do sort of make you think. And so quite a bit this morning comes from a guy called Rick Renner, who's now based in Russia with his family and has a reasonable sized ministry, I believe. But he got me thinking, and it does make a lot of sense what he says. And so I thought, well, it's a good thing to bring. And sort of I've looked into it, and what he says, I think, yeah, it all, well, a lot of it, I mean, some I'm still working through, but a lot of it holds water, because I've dug deeper into it, and you sort of see where he's coming from. And it does make a very interesting Bible study to look at this. And as I say, it's called Wiles, Devices and Deceptions. It's about the enemy. It's about the way he operates. I want to start, obviously, on a real positive, and this verse comes from Colossians. And it says, Colossians 2:15, and God, having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. The thing to know is that Satan is a defeated foe. Christ through the cross, the work that God through Christ on the cross has brought about even, get there in the end, has had an amazing effect. Satan is a defeated foe. But there is one very important thing to note. Satan is defeated. He's defeated by the work on the cross, but he isn't yet a subdued or subjected foe. And that is a very important thing to realize. He's defeated, but for some reason, and I don't particularly understand all the ins and outs of it, he's not a subdued or a subjected foe yet. And I will show you verses that prove that. But that's an important thing to note. If we go to the next slide, this is one of many in the New Testament that talk about the enemy is still active. But the thing to remember, he is defeated. And Paul, when he writes to the Ephesians, he talks about Christ being the head, the church being the body, and the enemy being under the feet. And that comes, I think, in Ephesians 2 or 3. So Christ is the head, the church is the body, and the enemy is under the feet. The enemy is under our feet. That is incredibly important to know. But Peter here says, be alert, be watchful, be of sober mind, because your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. He's going around looking for people to get at. Non-Christians obviously are very easy prey. Unfortunately, Christians also can be quite easy prey to the enemy's tactics. Christians tend to forget he's defeated. As I said, he's not subdued or subjugated, and he still roams around like a roaring lion. Don't forget, Peter is writing to Christians and he says, your enemy prowls around. Don't forget, he's not the enemy of non-Christians. They sort of are complicit in his behaviour. But he is certainly the enemy of Christians. He is our enemy. And he prowls around like a roaring lion. The thing to know is, and you've probably heard it before, he's a roaring lion, but he has no teeth. But he makes one heck of a noise. But he has ways of operating. In fact, I think it's fair to say he only has one way of operating amongst Christians, and that's what I want to look at. So if we go to the next slide, you'll know this one, Ephesians 6:11. Put on the whole armour of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. So there's the first bit of the title coming through, wiles. Now, when you think of wiles, what do you think of? You think of sort of trickery. You think of things that are devious. You think of things that are there to trip you up. And so that's what comes to mind from the English word wiles. But what's quite interesting is when you start looking at the Greek for this word wiles, and it opens up quite a lot. So if we go and look at the Greek for wiles, and this is the first thing you'll come across. You'll come across the Greek word methodoia. It's a compound word. It's made up of two Greek words. But notice that the word methodoia, from which we get the word method, look at what it says. Travelling over. Travesty, trickery, wile, lie in wait. Now what's interesting about that is the phrase travelling over. You know, what's travelling over got to do with trickery? This Greek word only appears twice in the New Testament. Once it's translated wiles, and in the other case it's translated lie in wait. So this Greek word can either be translated wiles or lie in wait. And as we go on, you'll begin to understand where the lie in wait comes from. But the first thing to note about this Greek word, we get method from it, but it talks about travelling. Travelling over something. Well, where on earth does that come from? And how do you get trickery and wiles from a concept of travelling over? Well, you have to dig deeper. You have to go and look at the two compound words, what the two words are that are compounded to make up that word. So if we go to the next slide, the very first compounded Greek word is just the simple word with. But the second word is a word, hodiuo, to travel, to journey. So the compounded Greek word to start off with, basically when you look at what it's made up of, is made up of words that sort of say, with a journey, with travelling. And you think, well, this is getting a bit odd, because we've started off with wiles, which is trickery, and now we're travelling, with travel, on a journey. Huh? Let's dig even deeper, because that word hodiuo comes from another word. If we go to the next slide, it comes from a Greek word hodos, which is a primary word. So when you have a Greek primary word, other Greek words are derived from that. They're sort of words are added together, compounded to make other words, or they're derived from root words. But notice what the root word is. Road. By implication, a progress, the route, the act or distance. Figuratively, a mode or means, a journey, a highway. Now we started off with wiles, and we've looked at the root Greek words, and we're looking at things like journey and roads. Compounded with the word with, this is like with a road, on a journey, travelling a distance, going places. Remember, right, I said this word, the very first word, methodoia, gets used twice in the New Testament. Once it's translated wiles, but the other time it's translated lying wait. Now you'll begin to see where lie in wait comes from, because it's dealing with sort of robbers on a highway, robbers on a road. We go back in English history, you can talk about highwaymen. So you've got people travelling down a road, and bandits come out, lie in wait for them, take advantage of them, rob them. And this is why the original Greek word can be translated lie in wait, because it's all to do with bandits on a road, highwaymen on a road. Now if we go back to the very beginning verse, put on the whole armour of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Well, if you take all the Greek words together, the wiles is actually the root of the devil, the journey of the devil, the road of the devil. What is a journey? A journey is going from A to B. You start off and hopefully you'll arrive at your destination. The devil is on a journey with us. He starts somewhere and he is he's going to a destination with us. There is a destination involved in Satan's wiles. He is on a road. He's on a journey. He's going from A to B. That's what he wants to do. So if we look at something, and I've quoted this from Rick Renner because I think it sort of sums it up quite well. Contrary to the common belief of most people, this means that the devil does not have as many tricks in his bag as he would have you to believe. The word wiles, methodos, plainly means that the enemy travels on one road, he travels on one lane, or he travels on one avenue. In other words, he primarily has only one trick in his bag, and he has obviously learned to use this trick very well. He's a one-trick pony. The devil is a one-trick pony. And that's how you can understand from that phrase in Ephesians, that verse in Ephesians, if you look deeper as to where the Greek comes from. And don't forget, the Apostle Paul was an incredibly learned person. So he chooses words very carefully. All his words are chosen for a particular reason. As I said, the thing about a journey is Satan goes from a starting point and he's going to a destination. Well, where's his destination? Where does he hope to arrive with Christians? And this is where we come to the next bit. And this comes from 2 Corinthians 2:11. And Paul writes this. He says, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. And so there's a sort of a warning. He's saying, Satan can get an advantage of us, but we are not ignorant of the devices he uses. We are not ignorant of his mechanisms, of his schemes, of the way he operates. And so we have the second word, devices. But then we have to look at the Greek for that. So devices, according to Strong's definition, the Greek is noema, or whatever. It's a perception, i.e. purpose, or by implication the intellect, disposition itself, device, mind, thought. So it can be translated device, but it can also be translated mind and thought. Where's the devil headed? He's headed for your mind, for your thinking. We go to the next slide. This is taken from the Blue Letter Bible, but other ways that this verse, this word devices gets translated, if you look at the sort of the top section, it occurs as mind 4 times in the King James Version. It occurs as device once, and it occurs as thought once. And then if you look at sort of the outline of the biblical usage, the middle bit talks about a mental perception, a thought. Notice the second one, an evil purpose. It's to do with the mind, but implied within it is evil intention. Evil intention on your mind. And then the next bit says that which thinks, the mind, thoughts or purpose. You see, it's interesting that only once out of 6 times does that Greek word in the King James get translated devices. It should really be translated mind, because that's the more usual way for it to be translated. We are not ignorant of his, and if we go to the next slide, this is how I think it can be translated. Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his mind games. Mind games. He will play with your mind. He will put thoughts into our mind. He will make us think particular things. And say, if you look at what the sort of Greek originally implied, there's an evil intent with that. He has evil intention towards us. So if we put what we've got so far together, we've got the enemy going on a journey, and the destination for his journey, for his scheme, is our mind. If he can get our mind, if he can get the way we think, he will affect the whole of our life. That's why the mind is so important. And the mind is spoken of a lot in the Bible, but here Paul says, we are not ignorant of Satan's mind games. We're not ignorant of the way he plays with our mind, the thoughts he tries to put in it. And this is why the same Apostle Paul wrote this in 2 Corinthians 10. He says, the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. You can't use worldly weapons against the enemy. You cannot use mortal weapons, worldly weapons, human weapons. They will not work against the enemy. You have to use spiritual weapons. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. They have divine power to demolish strongholds. But where are the strongholds? We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We take captive, Paul says, every single thought to make it obedient to Christ. What Paul is saying, he says, everything that comes into my mind, it has to line up with the Word of God. It has to line up with the way God is. It has to line up with what God says. If it doesn't line up with that, I chuck it out and I get rid of it. Notice what he says. He says he takes it captive. To me, if you take a thought captive, you imprison it. Every single thought that comes into your mind, you imprison it. You don't let it out of the cage until such time as you've verified that thought. Is this thought correct? Is it of God? Is it the way God operates? Is it the way God acts? Is it what way God says? Is it the way God thinks? And if it doesn't tie up well, you dismiss it. So all thoughts have to be caged, imprisoned, until they're being verified against the Word of God, against what God would say or what God would think or the way God would act. It's very interesting here that if you're going to go back to the Greek, and I haven't done this, but it says we demolish arguments. Well, the word arguments there is actually thoughts as well. For some reason, Paul has used a different word for arguments as opposed to thought in the very last sentence. But actually, it's all to do with thoughts. The King James Version for arguments has imaginations. Well, imaginations occur in the mind. It's where you think. And so Paul says the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. You've got to fight with spiritual weapons because they have divine power to demolish strongholds. You can demolish all the arguments of the enemy. Anything that the enemy wants to plant in your mind, you can demolish entirely. You can destroy it. Because this is what Paul says. Because the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, they're spiritual. And they have divine power. We go on to the very last word, next slide, which is deception. And according to the dictionary, deception is the act of deliberately making somebody believe something that is not true. And this is the ultimate objective of the enemy. He wants to make you believe a lie. He wants to make you believe something that is not true. And that's been his plan right from the beginning. You only have to go back to Genesis 1, 2 or 3, wherever it is, and look at how Satan got at Adam and Eve. And I think in the New Testament it says somewhere, I can't remember where it is, that Satan deceived Eve. Planted thoughts in her mind. You know, God's holding back on you. You know, has God said that? Or you'd be really better off if you could eat of that tree and get what comes as a result of it. It's deception. It's all about believing the lie. And if the enemy can get you to believe the lie, he's got you. And unfortunately, the church has quite a few lies circulating within its theology. And that's not very helpful. Because unfortunately, it's very easy for us as Christians, if we're not aware, if we're not alert, if we're not watchful, we can fall for what the enemy says to us and believe it. And he's got us. And just finish with, again, this comes from Rick Renner, but again, he's phrased it in a way that I think it's quite good. Deception occurs when a person believes the lies that the enemy has been telling him. The moment you begin to believe the lie that the devil has been telling you is the very moment when those wicked thoughts and mind games begin to produce reality in your life. The devil may assault your mind by repeatedly telling you that you are a failure. However, as long as you resist those allegations, they will exert absolutely no power in your life. If, on the other hand, you begin to give credence to these lies and mentally perceive them as though they are really the truth, those lies will begin to dictate to you and will dominate your emotions and your thinking. In the end, your faith in that lie will give power to it and will cause it to become a bona fide reality in your life, and you will become a failure. This is a complete deception. That's how the enemy gets at us. He convinces us in a lie. He puts thoughts and he says, well, this is what is true, but it's a lie. And as soon as we start believing those, we start giving credibility to the lie. And although I'm still working through this, I believe he's right, that as when you start believing the lie, it becomes self-fulfilling. You start actually, well, you believe the lie, and then it starts to actually come true. And it finds its way into your life, and you start becoming the very thing that you're believing. You have been deceived. Deception has got you. And the enemy has reached his destination completely. It's quite interesting when you look at these Greek words and you see what words Paul has used. But remember this, you know, the Wiles are talking about a journey, being on a road, a single road that the enemy's on, but he's on that journey to get you. His destination is our mind, our thinking. And then if we believe what we're thinking, the lies that is propagated, if we believe them to be true, then we are deceived, and the deception is complete. Amen.